Hello, I am Shushai Adane. My guest today is Meresa Tsehaye, a political analyst at Mekelle University. We will try to raise and discuss quite different current issues. Stay with us. Thank you very much for being the guest of this program, Meresa.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, just to start with, what are the root causes that brought Ethiopia to the current stage? In other words, it's an open secret that it is in such a catastrophic situation. So what are the root causes that led it to this stage?
Okay, thank you. In fact, this is a very complex question because Ethiopia today is simply a symbol of geopolitical catastrophe. It's a symbol of humanitarian crisis, a symbol of civil war, a symbol of genocidal war perpetrated by the genocidal regimes in alliance with neighboring states and international sponsors. So Ethiopia this time it becomes a burden to not only to Ethiopians but also to African and the world at large, because Ethiopia becomes one of the hotbeds of international crisis. Ethiopia now is mentioned. Tigray at this time is one of the center of geopolitical war, center of civil war, genocidal war, war crime, all the bad jargons that we know so far are implemented in Tigray. And Tigray is one of the hotspots that defines international politics, African politics, and Horn of African politics. And in fact, it will determine the fate of not only the Tigrayans' fate. As of this time, Tigray will be different, Ethiopia will be different, and the Horn. And it will affect, directly or indirectly, the international order. So Ethiopia evolves into the current crisis because of several reasons. In fact, it's a very complex, but I can mention some of the reasons.
Yeah, that's what I
mean. Because of the historical reasons, the Ethiopian people were struggling against monarchy and militarism. As a result, the 17 years armed struggle that was conducted, was led by the TPLF-EPRDF, was successfully toppled the Derg regime. Not only the Derg regime, but also it topples the political idea of unitary Ethiopia, assimilationist Ethiopia, Ethiopia that rejects diversity, rights of nations and nationalities, Ethiopia that rejects market economy. So after that, in 1991, when the TPLF-EPRDF came to power, the TPLF-EPRDF addresses the basic contradictions. What were the basic contradictions? National oppression, class oppression, and then the quest for democracy. So the 1995 Constitution tries to address, legally and politically, that Ethiopia is a state of diversity. The Ethiopian nations and nations have their own indigenous and unique culture. So we have to legally and politically recognize these ideas. Ethiopia is a land of diversity. So the government system, political system should be compatible with existing reality. So it transformed Ethiopia into a federal multinational state. Recognizing that the Ethiopian nations and nationals, the owners of the sovereignty, and they are entitled to the right self-determination up to and including secession. This is simply to address the national oppression thesis that the other Ethiopian nations are complaining about Ethiopia, because the pre-1919 Ethiopia was, ideally, it was Amharanized Ethiopia. It was led by the Shua Amhara elites. They consider Amhara and Ethiopia one and the same. So the other nations and nationalities should be Amharanized. They should accept the Amhara culture, religion, and language. So the constitution says that these nations and nationalities should be entitled to self-rule, self-administration, and self-determination. So the political reason, the second reason was, in fact, in Ethiopia is unique in its contradiction. We can find in Ethiopia there are unitarists, assimilationists. unitary assimilation means they want to be a centralized Ethiopia dominated by one nation and one language, one flag, and these all things. There are also three thoughts that oppose this idea. There are federalists, dominantly led by the Tigrayans. Ethiopia should be federalized. Ethiopia is a land of diversity, so that the Ethiopian nation should have their own self-rule rights. So there is the self-rule and shared rule concept. They have their own regions. They are entitled to administer, develop, and their culture, history, even economic development in their own regions. At the same time, they can equally participate at the federal level. So the third shared rule and self-rule concept were introduced. There are also secessionists. It is impossible for Ethiopia to transform, to democratize. The other reason is, in Ethiopia, because of this contradiction, we can witness that the political system itself becomes polarized between the majority and the minority. Demography becomes a political instrument. For example, this motto, 95 to 5%. Tigray is a 5%, 5 million people, so that we can eradicate.
As to them, yes.
Yeah, we can eradicate Tigray so that we can create by eliminating the 5%. So the demography becomes politicized. So it creates majority and minority. Not only that, it creates also center and periphery. Those who are around Addis Ababa are considered themselves as center. But those who are on the peripheries, including Tigray, Afar, Somalia, the people in the southern nations and nationalities, Benishangul and Gambela were considered not only minority, they considered numerical minority, at the same time they are periphery. So they has to be forced to be part of the center. Everything should be dictated from the center, from Addis Ababa. We call it politica shua. So this creates minority-majority dichotomy. The paradox is, Tigray is numerically, I can consider the third majority, next to the Oromos, and in fact, the Amhara, it includes Ago, many nations here, but if we consider Amhara as second majority, so Tigray should be the third. But they consider Tigray is 5% out of the Ethiopia, so they consider it minority. As Tigrayans, we have never been considered ourselves as a minority, because our contribution, our civilization, our independence, our struggle to maintain our existence and territorial integrity is beyond. Because democracy has never been a number. Democracy is about idea of equality, idea of justice. So the Tigrayan peoples are known for their determination to equality, justice, independence. So we have never considered ourselves as a minorities, because the number doesn't matter for us, because we have survived for more than 3,000 years.
But for them, that matters.
But for them, they consider that. They try to define democracy in terms of number, so that they are calculating the population number. So it is easy to engulf and eliminate Tigray, even by sacrificing 5 million people or 10 million, 20 million. That's why they are engaging in this mass wave and the current conflicts. This creates, center periphery, minority majority. And then the political elites at the palace, Minilik Palace, they always think that not as a political elite that transform society into democracy, development, and modernization. Rather, simply it creates that a predatory political economy. Ethiopia, in fact, it considers that Ethiopia is a 3,000, a land of cradle of humanity, these all things. But Ethiopia remains still agrarian. Not only agrarian. Ethiopia, its development depends on aid, humanitarian aid as well as development aid. And those who are in the palace, they consider if you control the Malik Palace, you control the economy, you control the politics. So all struggles by the people of Ethiopia is simply to put one dictator in the palace, so that that dictator is considered as bread maker, distributor, and a king maker. So anyone who supports the king, the dictator and the fascist in the palace,
will survive.
Will survive. Anyone who opposes the fascist, the dictator in the palace, is expected to be eliminated. And Tigray is repeatedly facing this reality. Tigray has never been ready for fascists and dictators coming to eliminate, undermine its contribution from the Menelik palace. So the second reason was, the economic reason was a reason for the current crisis. Now, Ethiopia is consuming world economy. Ethiopia is consuming African development supports. Ethiopia is consuming, Abiy Ahmed's Ethiopia is consuming the 27 years accumulated wealth of Ethiopia. Simply to serve a fascist in the palace for his genocidal project. So Ethiopia fails to produce democracy, to transform its economy, at the same time to live in peace and harmony. So that because of internally, because of lack of legitimacy, political crisis, economic failure, because Ethiopia at this time is simply a predatory state. It consumes its own resource for war. So we can't expect Ethiopia will have a development. You know, there is no possibility for Ethiopia to develop and transform the rural people, the peasant, and even create employment for the educated in the urban areas. The inflation is high. Even the country is simply a dumping centers of international armaments, so that Ethiopia is at this time a lucrative center for those who sell armament to Ethiopia. So it is a creates that not only civil war, it's a dumping center for small and light weapons. At the same time, Ethiopia is also a proxy center for all regional actors, including Eritrea, Somalia, even South Sudan, Sudan. There are also it's a proxy center for ideological conflicts, geopolitical conflicts. So, in fact, Ethiopia is sacrificing its own territorial integrity, its sovereignty, its legitimacy. It consumes its economy. But this all failures leads to make Tigray a victim, because the Ethiopian regime is is preaching that I'm engaging in this war simply to maintain Ethiopia's territorial integrity. Abiy Ahmed repeatedly says Ethiopia will survive. It will not be dismembered. And practically Abiy Ahmed is the only leader within 4 years, leads Ethiopia into collapse and dismemberment. It has never been. Even the Derg regime was by far better than Haile Selassie and the other leaders. But Abiy Ahmed was totally, he leads Ethiopia into catastrophe, into dismemberment. I expect after this war, Ethiopia will be totally different. So the Ethiopia we know will not be in the future. We will have a different Ethiopia. We will have also a different Tigray. That's why at this time Ethiopia is, is a proxy center for ideological conflict, the East and the West, for geopolitical conflict. Simply, it's also a playing ground between the hegemonic, the fascists who aspire hegemony in the Horn of Africa, Isaias Afwerki, and in fact Mohamed Farmajo is already gone. Ethiopia is in between the Red Sea and the Nile, so it attracts everyone who is interested to destabilize this region. And Abiy Ahmed is the most preferable leader in Ethiopia for those who believe it is easy to destabilize the Horn and control and extract resource. That's why this time, for me, Ethiopia in all aspects is a burden to the world. Not only a burden to the Ethiopians, because this time Ethiopians are totally feeling uncertainty. No one knows what will happen tomorrow, what will happen after a year. And the Ethiopia's fate is, now it becomes normal, Ethiopia will be dismembered. This is the common discussion and the citizens. So the world is watching and trying to manage the catastrophe for that.
Sorry. We'll discuss about that later.
Okay.
That's why I interrupted you. Why did Abiy Ahmed choose to take such a way or a path in handling the case of Tigray?
You know, Abiy Ahmed is a rare case in Ethiopian leadership history. You know, he tries to become the seventh king, and the prophet of his mother, and he tries to become a king not only in Ethiopia, in the whole. In fact, he was misled by the international community because they untimely branded him as the young African leader, reformer, winners of Nobel Peace Prize. In fact, Abiy Ahmed was a mistake to Ethiopia. Historically, we can consider a mistake because of two things. In the first place, he has not the capacity to lead this country, this very complex country. Not only very complex country, geopolitically important, a state of 120 million population, a state of a number of contradictions. But Abiy Ahmed was, you know, those who recruited him to the palace, they will regret that. It was a historical mistake. So Abiy Ahmed is simply become a problem to Ethiopia because he has not the capacity, and he's not also ready to know what Ethiopia is. The second one is, you know, Abiy Ahmed mishandled the place of Tigray because he wants to reinvent Minilik II. He wants to reinvent Haile Selassie and Fascist Derg. So he becomes, he does not consider himself as a successor of Meles and Haile Mariam Desalegn. Rather, he wants to continue the history of Minilik, Haile Selassie, and
The monarchical system.
The monarchical system and the fascist military system, Derg system. So he considered the 27 years as dark era. He undermines the contribution of the Tigrayans to Ethiopia as well as to the current regime. So as a beginning, he considered that he wants to be the king, not a leader, a president or a prime minister. Then he considered that Tigray, because of its history, Tigray has never accepted any forms of monarchical, even in the first, we can mention the first Weyane peasant protest. So that Abiy Ahmed considered that Tigray will be a challenge. On one hand, Tigray will be a challenge for Abiy Ahmed. He was right, because Abiy Ahmed has no.
You mean the way he handled Tigray was right and is still right?
It was wrong, but for me it was inevitable for Abiy Ahmed to, you know, because his policy was wrong. He wanted to prize Minilik II, Haile Selassie, and Derg. He wanted to see a weak Tigray, divided Tigray, Tigray that he was determined, and he is also determined to undermine its history, its contribution, its civilization, and even its numeric status, geopolitical status. You know, he prefers Eritrea to Tigray. That's why he is proudly presenting that Eritrea is in Ethiopia, but Tigray is out. And he prizes Isaias Afwerki as his mentor and his father. So the reason is that maybe if Abiy Ahmed prizes Minilik II, he was right to face this crisis, because he tried to label the Tigrayans as anti-Ethiopia, as cancer, weed. Even he considered the Tigrayans as contrabandists. He considered the Tigrayans' dedications, contributions.
Even highness of the midday, I mean.
Yeah,
yes.
the hyena. And so all the bad jargons, he tried to humiliate, segregate the Tigrayans, because he considered that the Tigrayans are not ready for any forms of assimilation from Minilik Palace. So, but he was in trap, you know. On one hand, he wants to undermine Tigray and its contribution. On the other hand, he could not be a legitimate leader in Ethiopia by undermining Tigray's history, culture, civilization, independence. For example, he wants to build an Ethiopia, Greater Ethiopia, Pan-Africanist Ethiopia, Minlik Ethiopia, Haile Selassie Ethiopia. He wants to promote Ethiopianism by undermining the ethno-nationalists. But everything, the ideas for Ethiopia today were evolved from Tigray. For example, he wants to praise Orthodox, he wants to get the support of the Orthodox Church. But the origin of the Orthodox in Ethiopia is Tigray, Muslim, the Stephanician, all religious sects are from Tigray. He wants to take Adwa as a symbol of independence and heroism by undermining the Tigrayans' contribution, by undermining Alula's and Mengesha's and the Tigrayan contributions. But at the same time, Adwa is in Tigray. Alula is from Tigray and Mengesha is from Tigray, and Tigray is the cradle of independence, the origin of Pan-Africanism. So that, these are the contradictions that Abiy cannot escape. So finally he wants to control Tigray, to legitimize his leadership of King of Ethiopia. But he's not interested to engage with the Tigrayans, to bring democracy development in Tigray. Rather, controlling Tigray by eliminating Tigray and its people. That's why his social advisor, Daniel Kibret, said that the Tigrayans should be eliminated from history, from name, from map, from memory. The reason is eliminating the Tigrayans so that in order to control Tigray. So he's also aspiring not only to control Tigray, but also to control the Red Sea. So not only, he's supported by the Amhara elites. Their reason is Amharanizing Ethiopia in the whole. They will try to retake Eritrea, and they consider Ethiopia is up to the Red Sea, and Tigray is a problem. So they wanted to control Tigray, eliminate the Tagarus, so that they will go to the Red Sea. So they will be hegemonic leaders in the whole. The other reason why Abiy Ahmed mishandled Tigray is, he selected the bad leaders. Abiy Ahmed is, in fact, not only a friend, but Isaias Afwerki is his mentor, his master. Abiy Ahmed is a junior partner. A close friend of Isaias Afwerki cannot be, you can't expect good things from Isaias, because Isaias is inherently destabilizer. Isaias is inherently anti-Tigray. So that's why he came up with this concept, politika hatso. That means cleaning the Tigrayan legacy, not only from Tigray, but also from the whole. Isaias wants to reconfigure the whole. So not only eliminating the Tigrays, but also it's a kind of Berlin Conference. The agreement between Abiy, the Amhara elites, and Isaias Afwerki is simply partitioning Tigray into 3 spheres of influence. The areas of Tigray north of the main road are expected to be part of Eritrea, and the areas Wolqayit and Raya will be part of Amhara. The other part, Mekelle and around, will be under the influence of Abiy Ahmed, so that Tigray will be eliminated from map, from name, at the same time from history. Isaias is also aspiring that Eritreanizing Ethiopia and the whole. On Abiy's side, Abiy is trying to Ethiopianizing the whole by even undermining Eritrea's sovereignty. That's why he considers the Eritreans' 13 years struggle is simply a wastage, because the Eritreans believe that they are Ethiopians. Maybe Isaias considers Isaias becomes more Ethiopian than even the Amharan and the Oromo elites. That's why he considers the Ethiopian issue is his internal issue. This creates that, in fact, the third reason why Abiy Ahmed mishandled Tigray is he was prized by the international community. So Tigray is considered as a region, regardless of its contribution. Tigray is too big to be mishandled by Abiy Ahmed, to be defeated by Abiy Ahmed. That's why Tigray is surviving, struggling, and defeating its enemy. Not only Abiy Ahmed, but also Isaias Afwerki, Farmajo, and their international supporters. So the reason is, the international community is misleading Abiy Ahmed that he is the leader of the Horn of Africa, African reformer, so that he takes this for granted that he has international support, financial support, economic support, technological support, so that he can easily undermine Tigray, the Tigrayan leadership and Tigrayan people. Even that the world was silent for him, because they considered him as the one who is struggling for maintaining Ethiopia's territorial integrity. In fact, Abiy Ahmed is the one who is destabilizing, dismembering Ethiopia. He could be the last leader.
What do you mean by the last leader?
The last leader, I mean that if Abiy Ahmed continues in this way, I expect that the worst case scenario will come into a reality, that dismembering of Ethiopia. Because this is not a new issue, we were witnessing the collapse of Somalia in 1991, the collapse of Yugoslavia in 1991, the collapse of Libya in 2011. So Ethiopia is not different. If Abiy Ahmed continues in this destructive war, he could be the last leader. Ethiopia will be dismembered. So we will have a different scenario. The dismemberment of Ethiopia will have a dominant effect on the whole. So the other reason for Abiy Ahmed to mishandle Tigray is, maybe he is a graduate of technology. He was a former staff of INSA, and he is introducing technology. He's misusing technology for genocidal purpose. So the Middle East, UAE, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, they praise Isaias Afwerki and Abiy Ahmed as stabilizers, new leaders, new brides in the region. Even they got this royal award from Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. That means they become agents of the Middle East country in the region. They consider Tigray is a problem, TPLF is a problem in their intervention in the Horn. So eliminating TPLF, eliminating Tigray will be easy for them to control the Horn. Not only Eritrea but also Ethiopia, so that the UAE, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, even Turkey are actively engaging in this by trying to test their technology, the drone technology. So in this case, Abiy Ahmed, because of these reasons, because of his weak capacity to understand Ethiopia and to lead the country, because of his alliance of evils, the Amhara elites, Eritrea, Somalia, any evil elite who is interested to intervene in the Tigrayan war is welcomed by Abiy Ahmed. And the superpowers are also, they committed a mistake. They consider Abiy Ahmed as a capable leader, a reform leader. This is a historical mistake for the superpowers as well as regional powers. They will be responsible, at least morally, for destabilizing Ethiopia.
If not legally.
Yeah. But legally, they can consider, they don't care whether Ethiopia is a democratic state or not. Because they prefer their interests, not simply, they are not responsible for the failures in Ethiopia. Rather, morally they will be responsible, because the collapse of region collapse can lead into state collapse. And it creates humanitarian crisis, geopolitical crisis. So that ultimately, in fact, they are okay with that, when they see states are failed states, collapsed states, they say that, sorry, we were wrong. And I expect that even the heads, the UN Secretary General, African Union, the superpowers, they will say that we were wrong.
Okay, thank you. Let's proceed to the next question. How do you evaluate the way Tigray accepted and handled Abiy Ahmed as the Prime Minister at those times, in other words, 4 years ago? This is, I think, a quite important question that should be discussed.
Tigray's response to Abiy Ahmed is, at the beginning it was positive. the people of Tigray has been struggling for self-rule, self-determination, economic transformation, equality and justice in Ethiopia. So the people of Tigray, they engaged in the 17 years armed struggle, and that struggle changes Ethiopia, and Ethiopia survived for 27 years in development, peace and security. So when Hailemariam Desalegn came to power after the late Prime Minister Meles Zenawi, everyone was happy, because we in Tigrayans, in our history, we believe in equality, not in domination or assimilation, rather federalism, equality. We are among equals in Ethiopia, even though our contribution is greater than anyone. So it's not the Tigrayan people at the beginning were also pushing for EPRDF to reform itself. Not only the EPRDF but also the TPLF to reform itself, so that to address the development, democracy and security issues, justice issue in Tigray, good governance issues. When Abiy Ahmed came to power, everyone was happy. And in fact, for me, I had a doubt. You know, Abiy Ahmed came to power through democratic means, because democracy not necessarily brings democratic leaders. Even it can bring fascists like Mussolini, Hitler, and Abiy Ahmed. So Abiy Ahmed EPRDF was elected government at that time. Abiy Ahmed was elected by the EPRDF council. So he was democratically elected within the EPRDF. Even though they were perpetrating protests in Oromia. But he uses both mechanisms. On one hand, he was within the EPRDF, he was struggling from within. At the same time, he was supporting. In fact, later he revealed himself that he was supporting and leading the protesters in Oromia and Amhara. So at that time, it was easy for, the Tigrayans were considered as simply, Tigrayans were a leader, and we Tigrayans had a good contribution to Ethiopia. Ethiopia survived for 27 years. It has never been in that history, and it will not be. For 27 years, Ethiopia was different. So that Ethiopia will not come back, I don't see, unless I could be wrong. But it was a golden time for Ethiopia, relatively a golden time. It was not absolute. Then at the beginning, the people of Tigray was welcoming Abiy Ahmed. Even the leadership is also welcoming Abiy Ahmed, because let's the Oromo lead the country, because it's within the EPRDF, and the Oromos believe in equality. But when he controlled the power, he immediately began to segregate, alienate, humiliate the Tigrayans in his documentaries, in his speeches. So he wanted to prize, even he called, he was interested to have normalization with Isaias. In fact, he was working secretly with him. He invited all the anti-Tigrayan forces from Eritrea. They were in Eritrea for 20 years, including Birhanu Naggas and Andargachew Tsehaye. All opposition, all anti-Tigrayan forces were in Eritrea. They were trained, recruited by Isaias Afwerki. Abiy Ahmed invited all of them, and Isaias also welcomed as a peacemaker. Then all together he prized Menelik II. He never mentioned Johannes or Alula or even the Battle of Mathema. He reluctantly mentioned Meles. He undermined the contribution of Tigrayans. He cleaned all the Tigrayan political and civil servant appointees. Then, and in generally, he leveled the 27 years leadership as a dark era. Then he established a commission, border commission, to undermine Tigray's territorial integrity. And he undermined the constitution itself, the federal constitution that recognized sovereignty. Then the people of Tigray immediately realized that this Abiy Ahmed is simply the resurrections of Derg, resurrection of Haile Selassie, resurrection of Milik. He's not a democratic leader. He will evolve into fascism because he picks these ideas, majority minority ideas. The Tigrayans are he was sponsoring ISAT, and ISAT was the leader in this 95% idea. So this creates that the people of Tigray, at the beginning, there was a support for Abiy Ahmed, but when Abiy Ahmed tries to undermine, alienate, and segregate and humiliate the Tigrayan contribution, the people of Tigray timely start the legal and political struggle. The Tigray, you know the slogans, Tigray bows only to God.
So you mean Tigray has had no problem with regard to accepting Abiy Ahmed as the Prime Minister of the nation in the beginning, right?
Yeah, you know, he was in the PRDF as long as he respected the constitutional order, the right to self-determination, development and equality. He could be from EPRDF or not. So at the beginning it was simply a reform within the EPRDF the Tigrayan people are considering. But practically he becomes anti-EPRDF, anti-Tigrayan. So the people of Tigray started the legal and political struggle first. They called for respect the constitution, respect the sovereignty of nations and nationalities, respect Tigray's contribution, sacrifice, and stop undermining, humiliating, and imprisoning the Tigrayans. That was the slogans. And Tigray will never bow to any forms of assimilations and authoritarian leadership, fascist leadership.
But to God.
Oh yeah, Tigray bows to God, only to God.
Okay. It is an open secret that the joint forces of Isaias Afwerki or the regime in Asmara, Amhara Fano, Amhara militia, Amhara special forces, the Ethiopian, the National Defense Force of the Ethiopian nation, and the former forces of Muhammad Farmajo, I think, yes, along with their external sponsors, have in daylight massacred the people of Tigray, and in the face of the international community, right? So the world was and is, of course, still watching, right? So what would all this mean in the history of modern human in general, and the Ethiopian nation in particular? With this regard, has, by the way, the country ever had such a coincidence in its history?
In fact, partly history is repeating itself because the leaders in the Menilik Palace always they betrayed Tigray. And I think Gauriot Baikirang was the first Tigrayan intellectual who realized that Menilik, those who in the Menilik Palace undermined Tigray. That's why he criticized Menilik. Menilik didn't consider the Tigrayans as his own people. And Menilik was dividing Tigray into two by making a secret agreement between Italy and so he tries his best to undermine Tigray. The same is true for Haile Selassie. He was inviting the British Royal Air Force to undermine the first Weyane rebellion. It was a rebellion for self-rule, fair taxation, and self-administration. We call it the Abu Gharib, the first Weyane led by Blatta Haile Mariam Radda. The same is true for Mengistu Haile Mariam, who invited the Russian leaders and their armamentists to undermine Tigray and Eritrea. So Tigray is a victim of the Ethiopian leaders. It has been a victim. In fact, you know, they consider that we will not create a unitarist assimilation in Ethiopia in Ethiopia, in the presence of the Tigrayans, they consider that because Tigray is a challenge for them, because the Tigrayan thought is clear. Tigray wants to respect its own identity, history, and culture, self-rule, and respect the other nations and nationalities to administer themselves and recognize their identity and history. So Tigrayan thought in Ethiopia has been a federalist thought. Now it could be different. We tried several times. We sacrificed several times to democratic Ethiopia. But the response is genocide, war crime, crime against humanity, atrocity, treason, betrayal. So I don't think that we will continue in this vicious
all
cycle.
This in the face of the international community. Okay.
This was the history of Ethiopia. The only thing is the magnitude of the atrocity, now it becomes exceptional. Ethiopia is committing genocidal war on Tigray. Abiy Ahmed is committing genocide, all types of crime. Maybe we will have a new jargon to define this atrocity in Tigray. Genocide becomes normal. The international community is also tolerating genocide. It's the highest and the last crime in the world so far. But in Tigray it becomes normal. Even for Abiy, genocide is normal. War crime, crime against humanity. Even he proudly presented that his army is committing this simply, simply like killing his belligerents. So the magnitude is different in Ethiopia. It's shameful because Tigray becomes a victim of its own, become victimized by its own state. So far we are in Ethiopia. I don't think so will be, because you can't live with a genocidal regime, a genocidal state. The same is true, Abiy Ahmed is deceiving everyone. He deceives the African Union. He pretends he is the leader of Pan-Africanism. Ethiopia is the home of Pan-Africanism. It hosts the African Union. Ethiopia is fighting, imperialism, external forces. The African Union is idea of Pan-Africanism evolved from Adwa. But the African Union is reluctant. Even it calls that Abiy Ahmed and Isaias Afwerki's aggression as law enforcement activities. So we can't expect anything from the African Union. But it is an institution in Africa. As an institution, we can respect, because the international system works like this. Your idea should be placed in the nation and then regional organizations and international organizations. So the African Union, obviously, it supports dictators, states, leaders.
Does it have such an experience or history?
In 1994, there was a Rwandan genocide. The African Union, its history was a history of failure. It failed to prevent the Rwandan genocide.
You mean it did nothing to prevent?
It did nothing. The same is true. The African Union failed to promote democracy, elected governments, and so on. We know the history of Africa. So, in fact, there is a slogan in the African Union: "Never again to Rwandan genocide." But this is simply a slogan, There was atrocities, civil war in Sudan, South Sudan, everywhere. Even though in its Constitutive Act it says that we will reinvent the pre-colonial identities, we will respect family, we will promote democracy and African culture. But in practice, African Union is a failure. Its history is history of failure. So I don't, in fact, it has not the capacity, moral capacity, national and economic capacity, as well as military capacity to enforce, because the history is the same. So we should not expect anything from Africa. Rather, simply it's an African institution. So we have to recognize the institution, not his contributions. The same is true for the international community. The UN is also, the UN failed in Rwanda, in Yugoslavia, even Somalia, because the United Nations is a union of states, not people. the international order works. It's simply international relation is a relation of states, not peoples. Even though there are ideas, human rights, democracy, disorganized against gender violence, against genocide, the responsibility to protect. The responsibility to protect means if the national government fails to protect the rights and democracy of its citizens, the international community is responsible to protect the citizens from their national government as well as from external aggressions. The state can be, a state can violate citizens' rights because of two things. One thing is if the government is autocratic, fascist. So if the fascist government commits genocide, crime against humanity, against its own citizens, sovereignty will not be a problem. The international community is responsible to protect the citizens in that state by undermining sovereignty. That was the doctrine. The second one is a government could be willing to democratize, develop its own people, but it can lack. If it lacks capacity, the international community has the responsibility to support the government to build capacity so that to address the democratic and security needs of its citizens. So these are jargons in international system. Simply we learn them in the class of political science, human rights, democracy, jargon. But in practice, we have to be realistic. International system is a system of states. Tigray is considered simply a region in Ethiopian state. In fact, Antonio Guterres was praising Abiy Ahmed as African reformer. Even he failed to condemn that Eritrea was participating in Tigray genocide, and he is trying his best to defend Abiy. But in 1994 there was also Kofi Annan. In that time there was a Rwandan genocide, and when Kofi Annan completed his mission, he said that sorry, I had the opportunity to prevent the Rwandan genocide.
So you mean it's not something new for the international community and for the African Union too, right?
We should not expect, we should be realistic.
You expect nothing,
we expect
taking its history into account, huh?
Taking its history into account, we can't expect anything.
So it's always it's what you expected already?
Yeah, I expect, but the initiative was established simply to defend democracy, development and citizens.
But in practice it failed, you mean?
In practice it failed, yeah. Okay. The same is true for the UN, The UN is a union of states. We should be realistic that the United Nations first defends states, then citizens. So that it's simply the states. For example, at the beginning the West was praising Abiy Ahmed. They supporting Abiy Ahmed. They considered law enforcement. But later, when they began to witness the atrocities, they changed their mindset. At least morally, they criticized Abiy Ahmed. But on the East, China was a good friend of TPLF and DPRDF and Russia. But Russia and China, they were voting down in the UN Security Council. So simply they are sacrificing Tigray for geopolitical reasons. They consider Tigray's issue is an internal issue to Ethiopia. Even though Tigray's contribution is bigger than its number, the international system. So partly the United Nations is failing. It continues to fail to defend the people of the world, the people of Tigray.
Yeah, you mean the world as well.
Even in the world,
we are part of the world. It's okay.
Yeah, part of the world. So, but what matters is power. World politics, what matters is power.
We will come to that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And the same is true for the superpowers. The superpowers are so.
Yeah, it's almost the same. You already mentioned it. The UN is an organization of states, you mean. So in other words, the superpowers, it's obvious, right?
Yeah. Power politics matters, So they consider Tigray issue is an Ethiopian issue. But now, because of the atrocities, because of the aggression, because of its impact to destabilization of Ethiopia and the Horn, now they realize that Tigray is not simply a region. Tigray is not simply 5 million, a region of 5 million populations. So the one who controls Tigray controls the Horn politics. If Tigray is destabilized, the Horn will be, for sure, destabilized. So they realize that the crisis in Tigray will affect the American interests, the Russian and China interests, the Middle East interests. Abiy and Isaias, they are already exposed that they are incapable to undermine Tigray, to defeat Tigray. So there is in this geopolitical course, the one who controls Tigray controls Horn of African politics. So Tigray is not simply a region or simply a geographical area. Rather, Tigray is the center of civilization. Not only Tigray is not simply a center of resource, the centers of the idea of state in the whole, the center of civilization, the center of religion. If you control Tigray, you control the whole. So that Tigray, the people of Tigray is struggling to defend its civilization, its geopolitical position. At the same time, Tigray is struggling to defeat, to stop genocide and defeat its enemy. So now the world is realizing, the UN, the African Union, everyone is recognizing that Tigray's issue is not simply an issue in Ethiopia, it's not a Horn of African issue, rather Tigray's agenda is international agenda. No one will undermine Tigray. Tigray is bigger than its size, its number, because Tigray survives all the atrocities across history. Since the First World War, Second World War, Cold War, and so all things. So if you undermine Tigray, that means you are committing calculation so that your result will be failure. So the people of Tigray, now the world is becoming to recognize that we have to recognize Tigray's question. Tigray is not simply struggling for self-rule. Rather, it is struggling for self-defense, self-determination, defending its civilization, shaping its vision in the future. So that now the world is clear that, no, even Antonio Guterres said that you cannot defeat the Tigrayans.
Yeah, right. Okay, let's take into account our time. Yeah. So, of course, you touched it a bit, but to go further, Tigray, as you mentioned, is in a defensive war, right?
Yeah.
To ensure its survival or existence or safety and security of its people. So, what is the ultimate goal? Of course, you have touched it a bit, but just to go further, if you have more in this regard, what is the ultimate goal of the Tigrayan forces in this regard? Yes. Just in short. Sorry.
Yeah. You know, the Tigrayan history of struggle is clear. There is no difference in the cause of the struggle. In the 17 years and the 27 years and now, the same. In the first place, it's all about self-defense. Tigray is trying to defend itself from national fascism, regional fascism, Horn of African fascism. Tigray is struggling to defend from Isaias Afwerki's ambition and fascism, from Abiy Ahmed's fascism and regional hegemony, from the Amhara elitist fascism. So it's and they are regional and international sponsors. So it's self-defense. So by this, Tigray is struggling to stop genocide, war crime, crime against humanity, all forms of atrocities. So this is a natural right, constitutional right, and at the same time it is the responsibility of the Tigrayans to fulfill their historical mission. That is, defending Tigray civilization, defending Tigray's territorial integrity, at the same time shaping the Tigrayan future. So I think there are four important concepts here. The struggle in Tigray is all about self-defense, the first. The second one is about the self-defense, maintaining territorial integrity. This is an immediate, we can call it core interest of the struggle. Self-defense, maintaining Tigray's territorial integrity. At least the current constitutional territorial integrity of Tigray. The second phase will be, it's all about international observed referendum. You know, Tigray is facing atrocity, crime, betrayal, treason by the Ethiopian Defense Force, Eritrean forces, and other international as well as regional institutions. So this time, we have to break the cycle, vicious cycle. I hope the new Tigray will be different. But, you know, I have only one vote. I can express my interest, taking as a student of political science and learning the Ethiopian political history and the treasons and atrocities, I can say this is enough for Tigray, so that the Tigrayan vision should be different. But the decision could be
up to the people.
Up to the people. It could be remain Ethiopia. But the Ethiopians, the Tigrayans are struggle for international observed referendum, the second phase. The last phase could be, you know, bringing the genociders into justice, compensation, this could be the issues. But finally, the goal of the struggle could be making Tigray part of the international democratic community. That means making Tigray, you know, we are in the world. We are not only in Ethiopia. Yeah, we are in the world. So we want to be part of the democratic community. We should not be part of the fascists, the genociders, and the undemocratic world. So the vision is the vision of a new Tigray. The vision of new Tigray means Tigray's future will be defined by the Tigrayans, by the sacrifice of the heroes and heroines of the Tigray. That's why, you know, Tigray is fighting these unimaginable forces, you know, the Eritrean forces, the Ethiopian forces. This could be a new history in the world. Tigray will be a departure in military study, in political studies, social science, natural science studies. This war will shape a new world order. So that the reason is we will shape the new Tigray. The new Tigray will be a new Tigray which is part of the democratic community, culturally, politically, economically. So we have to believe that we are not simply in Ethiopia. It will be decided by the referendum. But Tigray is part of the world. Okay. So that will be the vision. So the goal could be immediately self-defense and maintain territorial integrity. The second phase, referendum, and the final phase, and the vision of a new Tigray, that is part of making Tigray part of the democratic community.
Thank you. Let's make this our last question. Let's see the role the Tigrayan forces may have in maintaining the peace and security of the African, the Horn of Africa, just in few words.
Yeah, Tigray has been the political center, military center, not only center of civilization, but also all political changes since not only since 1960s, 70s, and 90s. Tigray is the center of change, idea. Political changes, military, the peasant protest, 17 years armed struggle, student movement, every change emanates from Tigray. So Tigray is a pacemaker in geopolitics, security, and even nation building. So I expect that the Tigrayan forces will be defeating the Eritrean force, the fascist Eritrean force, defeating the Ethiopian force, so that these forces are forces of genocide, forces of fascism, forces of regional authoritarianism. So Tigray is defeating, undermining, so that we will have a new security framework after that. So Tigray will be politically a new center, and security-wise, the Tigrayan forces will be a new regional force in the Horn of Africa, pacemaker that defeats authoritarianism, fascism, genocidal regimes. So Tigray will, as part of it has been contributing for stability, development in the Horn of Africa. For example, we can take the 27 years. It was the TPLF-led Ethiopia and the whole. Ethiopia was stronger regional balancer role in peacekeeping development. It contributes a lot. The mission of Tigray and TDF will be the same. So those who support Abiy Ahmed and Isaias Afwerki will change their mind that Tigray is too big to be undermined, so that Tigray is a center of security, development, and geopolitics. So they will come to Tigray and appreciate its sacrifice, and TDF and the Tigrayan forces will be a force of stability, development, security in the Horn of Africa, because the geopolitical setting of Tigray is unique. Tigray is in between the Red Sea, Nile, and Bab el-Mandeb, in between Eritrea and Ethiopia. So Tigray is pivotal in the whole. That's why earlier I mentioned that the one who controls Tigray if a democratic regime controls Tigray, the Horn will be stabilized. If the fascist regimes like Isaias and Abiy controls Tigray, the Horn will be in crisis and destabilized. So TDF is a force of self-determination. It's a force of anti-genocide, anti-fascism, anti-authoritarianism, so that it will be a force of democracy, development, and then the superpowers, regional powers, I hope they will change their mind. They will recognize Tigray's contribution. They will change the heroic struggle of TDF, and TDF will be part of the new security framework in the Horn of Africa. So the people who are struggling for self-determination will be liberated and appreciated TDF and the Tigrayan contribution.
Thank you very much indeed. I don't think so that you have something that you would like to add. If yes, this were all what I have for today.
Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed for being the guest of this program once again.
Thank you.